Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha. Swami Vivekananda's Practical Vedanta. The Sages of India. This talk I was sharing with you yesterday, but due to network problem, it got abruptly disturbed. So I would resume the remaining parts, the second part of this talk titled The Sages of India. We were talking about the divine love of gopis for the Supreme Lord Krishna, and that divine love could be understood only by those who know the unconditional love, who know the true nature of divine love. Only those who have pure hearts can understand the true love, the divine love of gopis for Krishna. One who has been kissed by thee, his thirst for thee increases forever. All the sorrows vanish and he forgets love for everything else but for thee and thee alone. Forget first the love for gold and name and fame and for this little trumpery world of ours. Then, only then, you will understand the love of the gopis, too holy to be attempted without giving up everything, too sacred to be understood until the soul has become perfectly pure. People with ideas of sex and of money and of fame bubbling up every minute in the heart, daring to criticize and understand the love of the gopis, that is the very essence of the Krishna incarnation. Even the Gita, the great philosophy itself, doesn't compare with that madness, for in the Gita, the disciple is taught slowly how to walk towards the goal. But here is the madness of enjoyment, the drunkenness of love, where disciples and teachers and teachings and books and all these things have become one. Even the ideas of fear and God and heaven, everything has been thrown away. What remains is the madness of love. It is forgetfulness of everything, and the lover sees nothing in the world except that Krishna and Krishna alone. When the face of every being becomes a Krishna, when his own face looks like Krishna, when his own soul has become tinged with the Krishna color, that was the great Krishna. Don't waste your time upon little details. Take up the framework, the essence of the life. There may be many historical discrepancies. There may be interpolations in the life of Krishna. All these things may be true, but at the same time, there must have been a basis, a foundation for this new and tremendous departure. Taking the life of any other sage or prophet, we find that prophet is only the evolution of what had gone before him. We find that that prophet is only preaching the ideas that had been scattered about his own country in his own times. Great doubts may exist even as to whether that prophet existed or not. But here I challenge anyone to show whether these things, these ideals, work for work's sake, love for love's sake, duty for duty's sake, were not original ideas with Krishna, and as such, there must have been someone with whom these ideas originated. They couldn't have been borrowed from anybody else. They were not floating about in the atmosphere when Krishna was born. But the Lord Krishna was the first preacher of this. His disciple Vyasa took it up and preached it unto mankind. This is the highest idea to picture. The highest thing we can get out of him is Gopi Jnana Vallabha. Gopi Jana Vallabha, the beloved of the gopis of Vrindavan. When that madness comes in your brain, when you understand the blessed gopis, then you will understand what love is. When the whole world will vanish, when all other considerations will have died out, when you will become pure hearted with no other aim, not even the search after truth, then and then alone will come to you the madness of that love, the strength and the power of that infinite love which the gopis had. That love for love's sake, that is the goal. When you have got that, you have got everything. That is, when you have got love for only love's sake within your heart, really you have attained everything. That is the supreme attainment, that is the supreme achievement, that is the bliss of the Brahman in Vedantic terms. To come down to the lower stratum, Krishna, the preacher of the Gita. There is an attempt in India now which is like putting the cart before the horse. Many of our people think that Krishna, as the lover of the gopis, is something rather uncanny, and the Europeans don't like it much. Dr. So and so doesn't like it. Certainly, then the gopis have to go. Without the sanction of Europeans, how can Krishna live? He cannot. In the Mahabharata, there is no mention of the gopis except in one or two places, and those not very remarkable places. In the prayer of Draupadi, there is mention of a Vrindavan life, and in the speech of Shishupala, there is again mention of this Vrindavan. All these are interpolations. What the Europeans don't want must be thrown off. They are interpolations, the mention of the gopis and Krishna too. Well, with these men steeped in commercialism, where even the ideal of religion has become commercial, They are all trying to go to heaven by doing something here. The Banya wants compound interest, wants to lay by something here and enjoy it here. Wants to lay by something here and enjoy it there. Therein means the heaven, the other world. Certainly, the gopis have no place in such a system of thought. From that ideal lover, we come down to the lower stratum of Krishna, the preacher of the Gita. Then the Gita, no better commentary on the Vedas has been written or can be written. The essence of the Shrutis or of the Upanishads is hard to be understood, seeing that there are so many commentators, each one trying to interpret in his own way. Then the Lord Himself comes, He who is the inspirer of the Shrutis, to show us the meaning of them. As the preacher of the Gita. And today, India wants nothing better. The world wants nothing better than that method of interpretation. It is a wonder that subsequent interpreters of the scriptures, even commenting upon the Gita, many times could not catch the meaning, many times could not catch the drift. For what do you find in the Gita? And what is what in modern commentators? One non-dualist commentator takes up an Upanishad. There are so many dualistic passages and he twists and tortures them into some meaning and wants to bring them all into a meaning of his own. If a dualistic commentator comes, there are so many non-dualistic texts which he begins to torture, to bring them all round to dualistic meaning. But you find in the Gita there is no attempt at torturing any one of them. They are all right, says the Lord, for slowly and gradually the human soul rises up and up, step after step, from the gross to the fine, from the fine to the finer, until it reaches the absolute, the goal. That is what is in the Gita. Even the karma kanda is taken up, and it is shown that although it cannot give salvation direct but only indirectly, yet that is also valid. Images are valid indirectly, ceremonies, forms, everything is valid only with one condition: purity of the heart. For worship is valid and leads to the goal if the heart is pure and the heart is sincere. And all these various modes of worship are necessary, else why should they be there? Religions and sects are not the work of hypocrites and wicked people who invented all this to get a little money, as some of our modern men want to think. However, reasonable that explanation may seem, it is not true, and they were not invented that way at all. They are the outcome of the necessity of the human soul. They are all here to satisfy the hankering and thirst of different classes of human minds, and you need not preach against them. The day when that necessity will cease, they will vanish along with the cessation of that necessity. And so long as that necessity remains, they must be there in spite of your preaching, in spite of your criticisms. You may bring the sword or the gun into play, you may deluge the world with human blood, but so long as there is a necessity for idols, they must remain. These forms and all the various steps in religion will remain, and we understand from the Lord Shri Krishna why they should. A rather sadder chapter of India's history comes now. In the Gita, we already hear the distant sound of the conflicts of sects, and the Lord comes in the middle to harmonize them all. He, the great preacher of harmony, the greatest teacher of harmony, Lord Sri Krishna, he says, in me they are all strung like pearls upon a thread. Sutre Marigana iva. We already hear the distant sounds, the murmurs of the conflict, and possibly there was a period of harmony and calmness when it broke out anew, not only on religious grounds but most possibly on caste grounds. The fight between the two powerful factors in our community, the kings and the priests, and from the topmost crest of the wave that deluged India for nearly 1,000 years, we see another glorious figure, and that was our Gautama Sakya Muni. You all know about his teachings and preachings. We worship him as God incarnate, the greatest, the boldest preacher of morality that the world, the boldest preacher of morality that the world ever saw, the greatest karma yogi, a disciple of himself, as it were. The same Krishna came to show how to make his theories practical. Swami Vivekananda is trying to suggest that the same divine force called Lord Krishna appeared as Buddha the Gautama, known as Lord Buddha, to teach the world, to show how to make his theories practical. Because Lord Buddha taught everything that was utterly practical, fully practical for anybody and everybody. He never taught anything impractical. There came once again the same voice that in the Gita preached, even the least bit done of this religion saves from great fear. Women or Vaishyas or even Shudras all reach the highest goal. breaking the bondages of all, the chains of all, declaring liberty to all to reach the highest goal. Come the words of the Gita, rolls like thunder the mighty voice of Krishna. Even in this life they have conquered relativity, whose minds are firmly fixed upon the sameness, for God is pure and same to all. Therefore, such are said to be living in God. Thus, seeing the same Lord equally present everywhere, the sage doesn't injure the self by the self and thus reaches the highest goal. As it were to give a living example of this preaching, as it were to make at least one part of it practical, the preacher himself came in another form, and this was Shakyamuni Gautama, Lord Buddha, the preacher to the poor and the miserable, he who rejected even the language of the gods to speak in the language of the people, so that he might reach the hearts of the people, he who gave up a throne to live with beggars and the poor and the downcast, he who pressed the pariah to his breast like a second Rama. You all know about his great work, his grand character, but the work had one great defect, and for that we are suffering even today. No blame attaches to the Lord. He is pure and glorious, but unfortunately, such high ideals could not be well assimilated by the different uncivilized and uncultured races of mankind who flocked within the fold of the Aryans. These races, with varieties of superstition and hideous worship, rushed within the fold of the Aryans and for a time appeared as if they had become civilized. But before a century had passed, they brought out their snakes, their ghosts, and all the other things their ancestors used to worship, and thus the whole of India became one degraded mass of superstition. The earlier Buddhists, in their rage against the killing of animals, had denounced the sacrifices of the Vedas, and these sacrifices used to be held in every house. There was a fire burning, and that was all the paraphernalia of worship. These sacrifices were obliterated, and in their place came gorgeous temples, gorgeous ceremonies, and gorgeous priests, and all that you see in India in modern times. I smile when I read books written by some modern people who ought to have known better that the Buddha was the destroyer of Brahminical idolatry. Little do they know that Buddhism created Brahminism and idolatry in India. Very bold declaration Swami Vivekananda is making here. Listen carefully. Listen, I repeat. I smile when I read books written by some modern people who ought to have known better that the Buddha was the destroyer of Brahminical idolatry. Little do they know that Buddhism created Brahminism and idolatry in India. There was a book written a year or two ago by a Russian gentleman who claimed to have found out a very curious life of Jesus Christ. And in one part of the book, he says that Christ went to the temple of Jagannath to study with the Brahmins, but became disgusted with their exclusiveness and their idols. And so he went to the Lamas of Tibet instead, became perfect, and went home. To any man who knows anything about Indian history, that very statement proves that the whole thing was a fraud, because the temple of Jagannath is an old Buddhistic temple. We took this and others over, we took this and others over and re-Hinduized them. We shall have to do many things like that yet. That is Jagannath, and there was not one Brahmin there then. And yet we are told that Jesus Christ came to study with the Brahmins there. So says our great Russian archaeologist. Thus, in spite of the preaching of mercy to animals, in spite of the sublime ethical religion, in spite of the hair splitting discussions about the existence of about the existence or non-existence of a permanent soul, the whole building of Buddhism tumbled down piecemeal, and the ruin was simply hideous. I have neither the time nor the inclination to describe to you the hideousness that came in the wake of Buddhism. The most hideous ceremonies, the most horrible, the most obscene books that human hands ever wrote or the human brain ever conceived, the most bestial forms that ever passed under the name of religion, have all been the creation of degraded Buddhism. Buddhists would find it very difficult for them to understand what Swami Vivekananda is saying, but that is a historical fact, unpalatable though it may appear to the Buddhists and followers of Buddhism, or rather degraded Buddhism. But India has to live, and the Spirit of the Lord descended again. He who declared, I will come whenever virtue subsides. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam dharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. I will come whenever virtue subsides, came again, and this time the manifestation was in the south, and up rose that young Brahmin of whom it has been declared that at the age of 16 he had completed all his writings. Swamiji is now talking about Jagat Guru Adi Shankaracharya. The Brahmin of whom it has been declared that at the age of 16 he had completed all his writings, the marvelous boy Shankaracharya arose. The writings of this boy of 16 are the wonders of the modern world, and so was the boy. He wanted to bring back the Indian world to its pristine purity, but think of the amount of the task before him. I have told you a few points about the state of things that existed in India at that point of time. all these horrors that you are trying to reform are the outcome of that reign of degradation. The Tartars and the Baluchis and all the hideous races of mankind came to India and became Buddhists and assimilated with us and brought their national customs, and the whole of our national life became a huge page of the most horrible and most bestial customs. That was the inheritance which that boy got from the Buddhists. And from that time to this, the whole work in India is a reconquest of this Buddhist degradation by the Vedanta. It is still going on, it is not yet finished. Shankara came, a great philosopher, and showed that the real essence of Buddhism and that of the Vedanta are not very different, but that the disciples didn't understand the Master and have degraded themselves, denied the existence of the soul and of God, and have become atheists. That was what Shankaracharya showed, and all the Buddhists began to come back to the old religion. But then they had become accustomed to all these forms. What could be done? Then came the brilliant Ramanuja. Shankara, with his great intellect, I am afraid, had not as great a heart. Ramanuja's heart was greater. He felt for the downtrodden. He sympathized with them. He took up the ceremonies, the accretions that had gathered, made them pure so far as they could be, and instituted new ceremonies, new methods of worship for the people who absolutely required them. At the same time, he opened the door to the highest spiritual worship from the Brahmin to the Pariah. That was Ramanuja's work. That work rolled on, invaded the north, was taken up by some great leaders there, but that was much later, during the Mohammedan rule. And the brightest of these prophets of comparatively modern times in the north was Chaitanya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You may mark one characteristic since the time of Ramanuja, the opening of the door of spirituality to everyone. That has been the watchword of all prophets succeeding Ramanuja, as it had been the watchword of all the prophets before Shankara. I don't know why Shankara should be represented as rather exclusive. I don't find anything in his writings which is exclusive. As in the case of the declarations of the Lord Buddha, this exclusiveness that has been attributed to Shankara's teachings is most possibly not due to his teachings, but to the incapacity of his disciples. This one great northern sage, Chaitanya, represented the mild love of the gopis, himself a Brahmin, born of one of the most rationalistic families of the day, himself a professor of logic, fighting and gaining a word victory. For this he had learnt from his childhood the highest ideal of life. And yet, through the mercy of some says, the whole life of that man became changed. He gave up his fight, his quarrels, his professorship of logic, and became one of the greatest teachers of bhakti the world has ever known, Maid Chaitanya. His bhakti rolled over the whole land of Bengal, bringing solace to everyone. His love knew no bounds, the saint or the sinner, the Hindu or the Mohammedan, the pure or the impure, the prostitute, the street walker, all had a share in his love, all had a share in his mercy, and even to the present day, although greatly degenerated, as everything does become in time, his sect is the refuge of the poor, of the downtrodden, of the outcast, of the weak, of those who have been rejected by all society. But at the same time, I must remark for truth's sake that we find this in the philosophic sects, we find wonderful liberalism. There is not a man who follows Shankara who will say that all the different sects of India are really different. At the same time, he was a tremendous upholder of exclusiveness as regards caste. But with every Vaishnavite preacher, we find a wonderful liberalism as to the teaching of caste questions, but exclusiveness as regards religious questions. The one had a great head, the other a large heart, and the time was ripe for one to be born, the embodiment of both this head and heart. The time was ripe for one to be born who in one body would have the brilliant intellect of Shankara and the wonderfully expansive, infinite heart of Chaitanya. One who would see in every sect the same spirit working, the same God, one who would see God in every being, one whose heart would weep for the poor, for the weak, for the outcast, for the downtrodden, or for everyone in this world, inside India or outside India. And at the same time, whose grand, brilliant intellect would conceive of such noble thoughts as would harmonize all conflicting sects, not only in India but outside of India, and bring a marvelous harmony, the universal religion of head and heart into existence. Such a man was born, and I had the good fortune to sit at his feet for years. Swamiji is now referring to his Guru Ramakrishna Paramhans. Such a man was born, and I had the good fortune to sit at his feet for years. The time was ripe, it was necessary that such a man should be born, and he came, and the most wonderful part of it was that his life's work was just near a city which was full of Western thoughts, a city which had run mad after these Occidental ideas, a city which had become more Europeanized than any other city in India. There he lived without any book learning whatsoever. This great intellect never learnt even to write his own name, but The most brilliant graduates of our university found in him an intellectual giant. He was a strange man, this Ramakrishna Paramhansa. It is a long, long story, and I have no time to tell anything about him tonight. Let me now only mention the great Sri Ramakrishna, the fulfillment of the Indian sages, the sage for the time, one whose teaching is just now, in the present time, most beneficial, and mark the divine power working behind the man, the son of a poor priest, born in an out of the way village, born in the out of the way village, unknown and unthought of, today is worshipped literally by thousands in Europe and America, and tomorrow will be worshipped by thousands more. Who knows the plans of the Lord? Now, my brothers, if you don't see the hand, the finger of providence, it is because you are blind, born blind indeed. If time comes and another opportunity, I will speak to you more fully about him. Only let me say now that if I have told you one word of truth, it was his and his alone. And if I have told you many things which were not true, which were not correct, which were not beneficial to the human race, they were all mine, and on me is the responsibility. Thus ends the lecture titled The Sages of India. Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha.